in the year of our Lord 1452, when the world balanced on the edge of transformation, the hills of Tuscany dreamed in morning mist. Here, where ancient olive groves whispered secrets to the wind and cypress trees stood like dark sentinels against the sky, something extraordinary was about to unfold. The village of Vinci slept beneath a canopy of stars that had watched over these rolling hills since time immemorial. Stone houses clustered together like sleeping children, their terracotta roofs glowing softly in the pre-dawn darkness. This was a place where seasons turned slowly, where the rhythm of life moved to the ancient cadence of planting and harvest, of birth and death, of dreams deferred and destinies fulfilled. But on this particular April morning, as dawn painted the eastern horizon with brushstrokes of gold and amber, the very air seemed to shimmer with possibility. The mist rose from the valley floors like the breath of sleeping giants, and somewhere in that ethereal veil, a child was about to be born who would change the world forever. Ser Piero da Vinci was a man of the law, a notary whose careful hand had recorded the mundane transactions of merchants and farmers for years. His world was one of documents and seals, of property transfers and marriage contracts, of the solid, predictable foundations upon which society built itself. Yet on this morning, as he stood in the doorway of a modest farmhouse, he faced a complication that no legal document could resolve. The woman inside, Caterina, young and beautiful, her dark eyes reflecting depths that spoke of intelligence and sorrow, was about to give birth to his child. A child who would bear his name but not his legitimacy, who would inherit his intellect but not his social standing, who would walk through the world marked by circumstances beyond his control, yet destined for greatness, beyond imagination. As the sun climbed higher, painting the hills in shades of amber and gold, a cry pierced the morning air. It was the first sound Leonardo da Vinci would make in this world. Not the polite whisper of legitimate birth, but a bold announcement that echoed across the valley like a challenge to the established order. The midwife who first held him would later swear that the child's eyes seemed to look through her as if he could see something the rest of the world had missed. His tiny fingers, already long and delicate, grasped at the air as if trying to capture the very light that streamed through the cottage window. And when she wrapped him in rough-spun cloth and placed him in his mother's arms, she noticed something peculiar. The child's left hand seemed to move with a strange, almost purposeful grace. In those first moments of life, as Caterina gazed down at her son, she whispered to him in the dialect of their hills, words of love and protection, of hope and fierce determination. She could not give him legitimacy, but she could give him something far more precious, the gift of seeing wonder in the world around him, of questioning what others accepted, of reaching always toward the impossible. The child they named Leonardo, the lion-bold one, would grow in this landscape of rolling hills and ancient wisdom. He would run barefoot through vineyards where the morning dew caught the light like scattered diamonds. He would sit for hours watching the flight of birds, memorizing the angle of their wings, the rhythm of their movement through the air. He would lie on his back in fields of wildflowers, staring up at clouds that seemed to form and reform like thoughts taking shape in the mind of God. But even as a child, Leonardo was different. While other children played with simple toys, he constructed elaborate devices from twigs and stones, creating mechanical wonders that amazed and sometimes frightened the adults who discovered them. His mind worked in ways that seemed to reverse the natural order. He wrote backwards, as if his thoughts flowed from some mysterious source that others could not access. The village priest, Father Antonio, was the first to recognize the extraordinary intelligence that burned behind Leonardo's dark eyes. During his brief lessons in reading and writing, the boy would finish his work with impossible speed, then spend the remaining time covering his slate with drawings of such precision and beauty that they seemed to capture not just the appearance of things, but their very essence. "This child," Father Antonio would confide to Ser Piero, "sees the world through different eyes. He draws not what he thinks he should see, but what is actually there. It is a gift that comes perhaps once in a generation, if we are fortunate." Ser Piero watched his illegitimate son with a mixture of pride and concern. The boy's brilliance was undeniable, but brilliance without proper channels could become dangerous. In a world where conformity meant survival, Leonardo's relentless curiosity and unconventional thinking marked him as different, and difference, however gifted, was not always welcomed. Yet as the seasons turned and Leonardo grew from child to youth, it became clear that his destiny lay far beyond the quiet hills of Vinci. His drawings filled every available surface: the margins of books, the walls of the cottage, smooth stones from the riverbank. Each sketch revealed new layers of observation, new ways of understanding the intricate mechanisms that governed the natural world. When Leonardo was 14, standing on the threshold between childhood and whatever strange adulthood awaited him, Ser Piero made a decision that would alter the course of history. He had watched his son's talent bloom like a rare flower in the Tuscan spring, and he knew that such gifts required cultivation beyond what their small village could provide. "Florence," he told Caterina one evening as they watched Leonardo sketching by candlelight, his left hand moving with fluid grace across the paper. "There is a master there, Andrea del Verrocchio, who takes apprentices. The boy needs proper training, proper tools, proper guidance." Caterina's heart tightened at the thought of losing her son to the great city, but she understood what Ser Piero did not say: that Leonardo's gifts were too precious to waste in provincial obscurity, too powerful to remain contained within the boundaries of their small world. And so, as autumn painted the hills in shades of gold and crimson, preparations began for a journey that would take Leonardo away from the only home he had ever known. The boy who had learned to see magic in the flutter of butterfly wings, who had discovered mysteries in the flow of water over stones, who had found wonder in the play of shadow and light across his mother's face, was about to enter a world where such visions might finally find their proper expression. The morning of his departure, Leonardo stood one last time on the hill behind his cottage, looking out over the valley where he had spent his childhood. The mist was rising again, as it had on the morning of his birth, and in its shifting patterns he seemed to see the outline of things to come. Great paintings that would capture the secrets of the human soul, inventions that would reach toward the very heavens, discoveries that would unlock the hidden workings of creation itself. As the sun climbed higher, illuminating the ancient landscape with gentle fire, Leonardo gathered his few possessions, his drawings, his notebooks, his carefully crafted drawing instruments, and prepared to leave the dreaming hills of Vinci behind. The boy who had been born in morning mist was about to walk into a larger world, carrying with him the gift of seeing wonder where others saw only the mundane ordinary. The roads that led from Vinci to Florence wound through countryside that seemed to pulse with the same creative energy that flowed through Leonardo's veins. And as the young man set out on his journey, the hills themselves seemed to whisper a benediction, as if they knew they were sending forth not just another apprentice, but a soul destined to unlock the very secrets of existence. As bronze cooled in the workshop furnaces and the last apprentices departed into Florence's lamplit streets, Leonardo's restless mind already wandered beyond the confines of any single art, toward horizons that would demand not just skill, but vision itself. The great wooden doors of Andrea del Verrocchio's workshop stood like portals to another world. Behind them lay not merely a place of work, but a universe of creation where marble transformed into flesh, where bronze became breathing horses, where pigments ground from distant lands could capture the very essence of light itself. When 15-year-old Leonardo da Vinci first crossed that threshold, the scent of linseed oil and marble dust filled his nostrils like incense in a cathedral of art. Verrocchio himself was a man carved from the same stone he worked, angular, precise, with hands that seemed to know secrets hidden from ordinary mortals. His workshop was the beating heart of Renaissance Florence, where the greatest artists of the age came to learn the mysteries of their craft. Here, apprentices learned not just to paint, but to cast bronze, to work silver, to understand the mathematical principles that governed proportion and beauty. The morning Leonardo arrived, the workshop hummed with purposeful activity. Young men bent over drawing boards, their faces intense with concentration as they copied the works of masters. The sound of hammers rang against metal, punctuated by the whispered instructions of senior apprentices and the occasional burst of laughter from those who had earned brief respite from their labors. Leonardo stood in the doorway, still dusty from his journey, clutching his portfolio of drawings with nervous fingers. The other apprentices barely glanced at him, another country boy seeking his fortune in the great city, no doubt. But Verrocchio, when he finally examined Leonardo's work, grew very quiet. His experienced eyes moved across the sketches with increasing intensity, seeing not just technical skill, but something far more rare, a vision that seemed to penetrate to the very heart of things. "You see differently," Verrocchio said finally, his voice carrying the weight of recognition. "Most learn to draw what they think they should see. You already draw what is actually there." The workshop became Leonardo's universe. Before dawn, he would arrive to prepare pigments, grinding lapis lazuli into ultramarine blue, mixing egg tempera with the methodical precision of an alchemist. He learned to stretch canvas, to prepare wooden panels, to understand how different surfaces would receive and hold paint. But more than technique, he absorbed the philosophical foundations of art itself. Under Verrocchio's tutelage, Leonardo discovered that art was not mere decoration, but a language capable of expressing the deepest truths of existence. Each brushstroke was a word, each composition a sentence in an eternal dialogue between the artist and the divine. He learned to see light, not as simple illumination, but as the fundamental force that revealed form and gave life to color. The other apprentices watched with growing amazement as Leonardo's talent manifested itself. His drawings possessed a quality that seemed almost supernatural, faces that looked as if they might speak, hands that seemed to move with breath-like subtlety, eyes that held depths impossible to fathom. While they struggled with basic proportions, Leonardo effortlessly captured not just the appearance of things, but their essential character. Among his fellow apprentices was Botticelli, already showing signs of the lyrical grace that would make him famous. There was Perugino, whose serene compositions would later influence a young painter named Raphael, and Lorenzo di Credi, whose careful technique would preserve the workshop's traditions long after its master was gone. Yet even among these gifted young men, Leonardo stood apart. His notebooks began to fill with observations that went far beyond the requirements of artistic training. He dissected the mechanics of the human eye, trying to understand how vision itself worked. He studied the flight of birds, not just to draw them accurately, but to comprehend the principles that allowed them to soar. He examined water as it flowed over stones, seeing in its movement patterns that connected to the way hair fell across a woman's shoulder or clouds gathered in the sky. The breakthrough came during his third year in the workshop. Verrocchio had accepted a commission for a painting of the baptism of Christ, and, as was customary, he assigned portions of the work to his most skilled apprentices. Leonardo was given the task of painting one of the angels kneeling beside the Jordan River, a relatively minor figure that would nonetheless test his ability to create a convincing divine presence. As Leonardo worked on his angel, something extraordinary happened. The figure that emerged from his brush seemed to glow with inner light, its face turned toward Christ with an expression of such profound reverence and understanding that it appeared to transcend the material world entirely. The angel's hair caught light like spun gold, its robes fell in folds that seemed to breathe with life, and its hands were positioned with a grace that spoke of perfect knowledge of divine mystery. When Verrocchio saw what his young apprentice had created, he experienced something that few master artists ever face: the recognition that the student had surpassed the teacher. The angel Leonardo had painted was not just superior to his own work on the same canvas, it belonged to an entirely different realm of artistic achievement. Legend would later claim that Verrocchio laid down his brushes that very day, declaring that he would never paint again. Whether or not the master truly abandoned painting, the impact of Leonardo's angel was immediate and profound. Word spread through Florence's artistic community of the miraculous work that had emerged from Verrocchio's workshop. Patrons began to inquire about the young man who could paint figures that seemed to possess souls. But Leonardo himself was not content with this early triumph. Even as commissions began to come his way, his mind ranged far beyond the conventional boundaries of artistic practice. He began to study human anatomy in earnest, convinced that true artistic mastery required complete understanding of the body's structure. He investigated the properties of light and shadow, developing techniques for creating the illusion of three-dimensional form on flat surfaces. His notebooks filled with sketches of mechanical devices, pulleys and gears, weapons and flying machines, architectural plans and engineering diagrams. While other artists focused solely on perfecting their painting technique, Leonardo seemed driven to understand the fundamental principles that governed all of creation. Art, for him, was not separate from science, but part of a unified quest to comprehend the divine order that lay beneath the surface of things. The workshop's other apprentices began to look upon Leonardo with a mixture of admiration and bewilderment. His talent was undeniable, but his interests seemed to scatter in all directions like light through a prism. He would spend hours perfecting the curve of a single smile, then abandon a nearly finished painting to investigate the mechanics of a water wheel he had glimpsed in the street. Verrocchio, watching his most gifted student with the eyes of experience, recognized both the promise and the danger in Leonardo's approach. The young man's vision was extraordinary, but his inability to focus on completing individual works threatened to dissipate his energies. Genius without discipline, the master warned, is like a river without banks. It creates floods instead of fertile fields. Yet even as he offered this guidance, Verrocchio knew that Leonardo's destiny lay beyond the conventional paths of artistic success. The young man was not meant to become merely another skilled craftsman, however talented. He was something rarer and more dangerous, a mind that refused to accept the boundaries that others took for granted, a spirit that insisted on questioning every assumption, exploring every possibility. As Leonardo's time in the workshop drew toward its close, he stood one evening in the great hall where he had first learned to see light as the fundamental force of creation. The space was empty now, the other apprentices having departed for their evening meals. Shafts of golden light slanted through the tall windows, illuminating motes of marble dust that danced in the air like tiny spirits. In that moment, Leonardo understood that his education was not ending, but beginning. The workshop had taught him the grammar of art, but the language itself was infinite. Every technique mastered revealed new mysteries to explore. Every question answered gave birth to a dozen more. He was no longer an apprentice learning to copy the works of others, but an artist ready to create visions that had never existed before. The candles burned low in their holders, casting dancing shadows on the walls where so many masterpieces had been born. And as Leonardo gathered his tools and prepared to leave the workshop that had shaped him, he carried with him not just skill and knowledge, but something far more precious. The understanding that art was not a destination, but a journey, not a profession, but a calling, not a craft, but a sacred dialogue with the eternal mysteries of existence. The candles burned low in their holders, casting dancing shadows on the walls where so many masterpieces had been born. And as Leonardo gathered his tools and prepared to leave the workshop that had shaped him, he carried with him not just skill and knowledge, but something far more precious. The understanding that art was not a destination, but a journey, not a profession, but a calling. Not a craft, but a sacred dialogue with the eternal mysteries of existence. The Florence that greeted Leonardo as an independent master was a city transformed by wealth and ambition. The Medici banks had filled the coffers of princes and popes, while merchant families competed to commission works that would immortalize their names in marble and paint. For a young artist of proven talent, it should have been a golden age of opportunity. Yet Leonardo found himself increasingly at odds with the expectations of his patrons and the conventions of his craft. His first independent commission came from the monks of San Donato, who sought an altarpiece depicting the adoration of the Magi. It was exactly the kind of prestigious religious work that could establish a young artist's reputation. Leonardo approached the project with characteristic intensity, creating preparatory drawings of breathtaking complexity. His studies of horses and riders, of architectural backgrounds and human expressions, revealed a mind that refused to accept simple solutions to artistic problems. But, as months passed, the monks grew increasingly frustrated. Where other artists would have delivered a completed work within a reasonable time frame, Leonardo seemed trapped in an endless cycle of revision and experimentation. Each figure required countless studies. Each background element demanded perfect understanding of perspective and light. The painting remained unfinished, a haunting collection of brown underdrawings that suggested depths of meaning no completed work could contain. This pattern would become the defining characteristic of Leonardo's career, a relentless pursuit of perfection that made completion itself seem like a form of artistic death. He began to see each commission not as a task to be completed, but as an opportunity to push the boundaries of what art could achieve. His notebooks filled with alternative compositions, with studies of light effects, with anatomical investigations that went far beyond the needs of any single painting. The lady with an ermine emerged from this period of restless experimentation. Cecilia Gallerani, mistress to Ludovico Sforza, posed for Leonardo with the small white creature in her arms, a symbol of purity that carried layers of meaning known only to the initiated. The portrait that resulted was revolutionary in its psychological penetration. Cecilia's face turned slightly away from the viewer, her eyes holding secrets that seemed to shift in the changing light. Her fingers, impossibly elegant, curved around the ermine's sleek form with a tenderness that spoke of hidden depths. Yet even as Leonardo created this masterpiece, his mind wandered to darker territories. He had begun to conduct secret dissections of human corpses, driven by an insatiable need to understand the mechanics of life itself. In the flickering candlelight of hidden chambers, he mapped the pathways of nerves and blood vessels, discovering that the human body was far more complex and beautiful than any external appearance could suggest. These anatomical studies influenced his art in ways that contemporary viewers could sense but not fully comprehend. His figures began to possess a quality of inner life that went beyond mere surface representation. He understood how muscles moved beneath skin, how expressions formed through the subtle interplay of facial anatomy, how the soul might manifest itself through the precise positioning of hands and eyes. The engineering projects that increasingly occupied his attention seemed to spring from the same source as his artistic innovations. He designed machines for moving water, for lifting heavy weights, for defending cities against siege. His notebooks filled with sketches of devices that would not be realized for centuries: tanks and helicopters, submarines and flying machines. Each invention represented not just mechanical ingenuity, but a vision of human potential that transcended the limitations of his age. Florence's wealthy patrons, however, wanted paintings, not philosophical treatises illustrated with mechanical diagrams. They commissioned portraits and religious scenes, not investigations into the nature of flight or the flow of water. Leonardo found himself caught between his own boundless curiosity and the practical demands of artistic patronage. His reputation as a genius was matched only by his growing reputation as an unreliable eccentric. Contracts went unfulfilled, commissions remained unfinished, and wealthy families who had eagerly sought his services began to whisper warnings about the artist who could create miracles but never seemed to complete them. The restlessness that drove Leonardo's art also drove his physical movement through the Italian peninsula. He traveled between Florence and Milan, spending months in smaller courts where his reputation preceded him. Each journey carried him further from conventional artistic success and deeper into the labyrinth of his own impossible ambitions. In Milan, he found a patron who seemed to understand his complex nature. Ludovico Sforza, called Il Moro, was a man of sophisticated tastes and political cunning. He needed artists who could create not just beautiful objects, but complete experiences, court entertainments that would dazzle visiting dignitaries, architectural projects that would glorify his reign, and military innovations that would secure his power. Leonardo's letter of application to Ludovico revealed the full scope of his ambitions. He presented himself not merely as a painter, but as a military engineer, an architect, a designer of public works, and a creator of marvels. Only at the end of his lengthy proposal did he mention, almost as an afterthought, that he could also paint as well as any man. The years of wandering had taught Leonardo that his gifts could not be contained within the traditional boundaries of artistic practice. He was not simply a painter who happened to have other interests, but a unified intelligence that saw connections between all forms of knowledge: art and science, beauty and function, observation and invention. These were not separate domains, but aspects of a single, comprehensive vision. Yet this very comprehensiveness created its own problems. The more Leonardo understood about the world, the more difficult it became to commit to any single interpretation of it. Each painting became a philosophical statement about the nature of reality, each engineering project a meditation on human potential, each anatomical study a prayer offered to the divine intelligence that had created such perfect mechanisms. His notebooks from this period reveal a mind in constant motion, leaping from architectural plans to studies of water flow, from portrait sketches to designs for war machines. The famous mirror writing that filled these pages seemed to reflect the way his thoughts moved backwards and forwards simultaneously, always approaching truth from unexpected angles. The artist who had once been content to paint angels in his master's workshop had become something far more complex and dangerous, a mind that refused to accept the limitations that others took for granted. His very success in transcending conventional boundaries made him increasingly isolated from the world of ordinary artistic achievement. As Leonardo prepared to depart once again, this time for the sophisticated court of Milan, he understood that his journey was just beginning. The boy who had learned to see wonder in the Tuscan hills, who had discovered the secrets of light and shadow in Verrocchio's workshop, was about to enter a world where his vision might finally find its proper scope. The roads between Italian city-states became as familiar to Leonardo as the veins in his anatomical drawings, each journey carrying him further from conventional success and deeper into the labyrinth of his own impossible ambitions. And in that labyrinth, he would discover both the greatest triumphs and the most profound frustrations of his extraordinary life. The roads between Italian city-states became as familiar to Leonardo as the veins in his anatomical drawings, each journey carrying him further from conventional success and deeper into the labyrinth of his own impossible ambitions. And in that labyrinth, he would discover both the greatest triumphs and the most profound frustrations of his extraordinary life. Milan in the 1480s was a city of contradictions, where Renaissance elegance masked medieval brutality, where poetry and poison flowed with equal ease through the corridors of power. The Sforza castle rose from the Lombard plain like a vision of earthly authority, its towers reaching toward heaven while its dungeons plunged into darkness. It was here that Leonardo da Vinci would spend nearly 2 decades of his life, creating his greatest masterpiece and experiencing his most profound disappointments. Ludovico Sforza, Duke of Milan, was a man who understood that power required not just force, but spectacle. He had seized control of the duchy through a combination of political cunning and military skill, but he knew that legitimacy came only through the cultivation of magnificence. His court became a magnet for the finest artists, poets, and intellectuals of the age, each summoned to contribute their genius to the greater glory of the Sforza name. When Leonardo arrived in Milan, he found a patron who seemed to appreciate the full scope of his abilities. Ludovico did not merely want paintings. He wanted a complete transformation of his court into a showcase of Renaissance achievement. He needed engineers to design new fortifications, architects to plan magnificent palaces, inventors to create mechanical marvels that would astonish visiting dignitaries. Leonardo threw himself into this work with characteristic intensity. He designed costumes for elaborate court entertainments, where mechanical lions would walk across banquet halls before opening their chests to reveal lilies in honor of the French king. He created theatrical sets that transformed the castle's great halls into mythological landscapes, complete with moving stars and flowing rivers. He planned irrigation systems that would turn the Lombard countryside into a garden of unprecedented fertility. But it was the commission for a painting in the refectory of Santa Maria delle Grazie that would produce Leonardo's most enduring masterpiece. The Last Supper was to be a mural depicting Christ's final meal with his disciples, a traditional subject that had been painted countless times before. Yet Leonardo approached this familiar scene with revolutionary vision. Rather than portraying the moment of the blessing of bread and wine, Leonardo chose to capture the instant when Christ announced that one of his followers would betray him. The psychological drama of this revelation allowed him to explore the full range of human emotion: shock, disbelief, anger, sorrow, and terrible understanding. Each apostle responded according to his nature, their faces and gestures creating a symphony of human feeling that surrounded the serene, inevitable figure of Christ. The technical challenges of the project were immense. Leonardo rejected the traditional fresco technique, which required artists to work quickly while the plaster remained wet. Instead, he developed an experimental method that would allow him to work slowly, building up layers of paint with the patience and precision his vision demanded. He mixed oil and tempera in ways that had never been attempted before, seeking to achieve effects of light and shadow that would give his figures the appearance of living beings. Night after night, Leonardo could be seen in the convent refectory, working by candlelight as he perfected the expression on a single face or the gesture of a single hand. The monks grew accustomed to his presence, understanding that they were witnessing the creation of something unprecedented. Sometimes he would stare at the wall for hours without touching his brush, as if waiting for divine inspiration to guide his hand. The painting that emerged from this obsessive process was unlike anything the world had ever seen. The disciples were arranged in 4 groups of 3, their bodies creating a rhythm of movement that drew the eye inevitably toward the central figure of Christ. The perspective was so masterfully handled that viewers felt they were sitting at the table themselves, participating in the drama unfolding before them. Yet even as Leonardo created this masterpiece, the experimental technique that had allowed him such freedom began to reveal its fatal flaw. The paint started to deteriorate almost immediately, flaking away from the wall in a process that would continue for centuries. The work that was meant to be eternal began to fade even as its creator still lived, a poignant metaphor for the gap between artistic vision and material reality. During these Milan years, Leonardo also encountered Gian Giacomo Caprotti, called Salai, Little Devil. Salai was everything Leonardo was not: impulsive, where the master was thoughtful; careless, where he was precise, concerned with immediate pleasures rather than eternal truths. Yet the bond between them endured for decades, suggesting depths of affection that transcended the conventional relationship between teacher and pupil. The presence of Salai in Leonardo's life added another layer of complexity to his existence at court. The young man's beauty inspired some of Leonardo's most sensual drawings, while his mischievous nature provided a counterpoint to the master's increasingly serious preoccupations. Together, they navigated the dangerous waters of Renaissance court life, where artistic genius provided some protection against the ever-present threats of political intrigue and religious suspicion. Leonardo's notebooks from this period reveal a mind grappling with profound moral questions. His designs for military machines, tanks and cannons, fortifications and siege engines demonstrated his understanding of warfare's brutal realities. Yet he was deeply troubled by the destructive potential of his own inventions. "I abhor war," he wrote, "which is the most bestial madness." The contradiction between his genius for creation and his patron's need for destruction created a tension that would haunt him throughout his career. The greatest project of the Milan years was also the greatest disappointment. Ludovico commissioned Leonardo to create a bronze statue of his father, Francesco Sforza, on horseback. The monument was to be the largest bronze casting ever attempted, a technical challenge that appealed to Leonardo's engineering instincts as much as his artistic vision. For years, he worked on the project, creating a full-scale clay model that amazed all who saw it. But the bronze allocated for the statue was diverted to create cannons when Milan came under threat from French invasion. Leonardo watched helplessly as his greatest sculptural achievement was reduced to military necessity. The clay model, left exposed to the elements, gradually crumbled away, leaving only drawings and memories of what might have been. The political situation in Milan grew increasingly precarious as the 15th century drew to a close. the Italian peninsula had become a chessboard where French, Spanish, and imperial powers maneuvered for advantage. Ludovico, despite his cultural sophistication, proved unable to navigate these treacherous waters. His attempts to balance competing foreign interests while maintaining his own power created a web of alliances that ultimately trapped him. Leonardo, observing these developments with the same analytical eye he brought to his study of water flow or human anatomy, began to understand that even the most brilliant individual achievements were subject to the brutal mathematics of political power. His notebooks from this period contain increasingly pessimistic reflections on the nature of human ambition and the fragility of civilized accomplishment. The court that had once seemed to offer unlimited possibilities for artistic and intellectual achievement began to feel like a prison. Leonardo's restless mind, always seeking new challenges and unexplored territories, chafed against the limitations imposed by political necessity. He began to envision a different kind of life, one where his investigations could proceed without the constraints of patronage and courtly obligation. As French armies approached Milan and Ludovico's power crumbled, Leonardo made preparations for another departure. He had spent nearly 20 years in service to the Sforza court, creating works that would outlast the dynasty that commissioned them. But he had also learned hard lessons about the relationship between artistic vision and political reality, between individual genius and the larger forces that shaped human history. The night before his departure, Leonardo stood one last time in the refectory of Santa Maria delle Grazie, contemplating his greatest achievement. The Last Supper glowed in the candlelight, its figures seeming to move with life despite the paint that was already beginning to deteriorate. He understood that this painting would survive long after the court that had commissioned it had crumbled into dust, that art possessed a kind of immortality that political power could never achieve. As French cannons echoed across the Lombard plain and the bronze meant for Leonardo's great horse was melted into weapons of war, the artist understood that even genius must bow to the brutal mathematics of power. The man who had dreamed of transcending human limitations through the marriage of art and science was about to enter a new phase of his journey, one that would test his vision against the harsh realities of a world in constant flux. As French cannons echoed across the Lombard plain and the bronze meant for Leonardo's great horse was melted into weapons of war, the artist understood that even genius must bow to the brutal mathematics of power. The man who had dreamed of transcending human limitations through the marriage of art and science was about to enter a new phase of his journey, one that would test his vision against the harsh realities of a world in constant flux. The fall of Milan in 1499 scattered Leonardo's carefully ordered world like leaves before a winter storm. At 47, he was no longer the promising young artist who had first arrived at Ludovico's court, but a master whose reputation had spread throughout Italy and beyond. Yet reputation, he discovered, was poor protection against the chaos of war and the fickleness of political fortune. With Salai and a small group of loyal followers, Leonardo began another period of wandering that would define the mature phase of his career. The roads of Italy, which had once seemed to offer unlimited possibilities, now felt like paths through a landscape of perpetual uncertainty. Each city-state that might have welcomed his genius was also a potential trap, subject to the same political winds that had destroyed his Milan sanctuary. Mantua offered temporary refuge, where Isabella d'Este, perhaps the most cultured woman of her age, provided patronage that came with its own complications. Isabella was a collector of genius, surrounding herself with artists and intellectuals as other nobles collected precious stones. She commissioned Leonardo to create her portrait, but the artist found himself struggling with more than technical challenges. The drawing he created of Isabella captured her intelligence and determination, but Leonardo seemed unable to transform the sketch into a finished painting. The woman who stared back from the charcoal lines possessed a will that matched his own, and perhaps this recognition of equality made completion impossible. The portrait remained forever unfinished, another casualty of Leonardo's increasing inability to reconcile his vision with the demands of completion. Venice beckoned next, that impossible city built on water where Eastern mystery met Western ambition. Here, Leonardo found himself consulting on military engineering projects, designing fortifications that would protect the Republic against Turkish invasion. The irony was not lost on him. The man who had written, "I abhor war," was now applying his genius to the art of destruction. His notebooks from this period reveal a mind grappling with profound contradictions. He designed weapons of unprecedented sophistication, while simultaneously creating studies of flowers with the delicacy of a prayer. He planned fortifications that could withstand cannon fire, while investigating the mathematics of beauty that governed the proportions of the human face. The return to Florence in 53 should have been a homecoming, but Leonardo found a city transformed by political upheaval and artistic revolution. The Republic that had expelled the Medici was now struggling to maintain its independence against the combined threats of papal ambition and imperial power. Niccolò Machiavelli, the brilliant political theorist, had become one of the city's most influential voices, advocating for a pragmatic approach to power that would have been alien to Leonardo's idealistic nature. It was here that Leonardo encountered Michelangelo Buonarroti, 23 years his junior, and burning with the fierce ambition that Leonardo had once possessed. The rivalry between them became legendary, fueled by their fundamentally different approaches to art and life. Where Leonardo sought to understand through observation and analysis, Michelangelo attacked marble with the fury of a man trying to liberate souls from stone. The competition between them reached its climax when both artists were commissioned to create monumental frescoes for the Hall of the 500 in Florence's Palazzo Vecchio. Leonardo was to paint the Battle of Anghiari, while Michelangelo would depict the Battle of Cassina. These works would have been the ultimate test of Renaissance artistic achievement, pitting the two greatest masters of their age against each other in direct competition. Leonardo approached the project with characteristic ambition, creating preparatory drawings that captured the fury and chaos of battle with unprecedented psychological intensity. His studies of horses and riders, of faces twisted by rage and terror, revealed a master at the height of his powers. The central group of the cartoon four warriors fighting for possession of a battle standard became one of the most copied compositions in art history. But once again, Leonardo's experimental techniques betrayed him. Determined to achieve effects impossible with traditional fresco, he developed a new method based on ancient descriptions of encaustic painting. The technique failed catastrophically, the paint running down the wall in streaks that mocked his ambition. The work that was meant to secure his reputation as the greatest artist of his generation instead became another emblem of his inability to complete what he had begun. Michelangelo, observing this failure with the cruel satisfaction of youth, completed his own cartoon before abandoning the project to work on the Sistine Chapel ceiling. The confrontation between the two masters ended not with triumph for either, but with a mutual withdrawal that left Florence's Great Hall forever empty of the masterpieces it had been designed to contain. During these years of professional frustration, Leonardo began work on a painting that would become his most famous creation. The portrait of Madonna Lisa, wife of a Florentine silk merchant, seemed at first glance to be a minor commission, a straightforward portrait of a woman whose beauty was pleasant but not extraordinary. Yet Leonardo approached this work with an intensity that suggested he saw in it possibilities that no one else could perceive. The painting that emerged was revolutionary in its psychological penetration. Lisa's enigmatic smile became a window into mysteries that no amount of analysis could fully resolve. Her eyes seemed to follow the viewer, creating a sense of living presence that transcended the boundaries between art and life. The landscape behind her, a world of winding rivers and distant mountains, provided a backdrop that seemed to exist in the realm of dreams rather than geographical reality. Leonardo worked on the portrait for years, carrying it with him as he traveled, making minute adjustments that only he could see. The painting became less a commercial commission than a meditation on the nature of human consciousness itself. In Lisa's face, he seemed to find the perfect synthesis of individual character and universal meaning, of observed reality and artistic vision. Yet even as he created this masterpiece, Leonardo's notebooks reveal an increasing preoccupation with themes of destruction and decay. His studies of human anatomy, conducted through the dissection of corpses obtained from Florence's hospitals, led him to contemplate the fragility of the flesh that housed the soul. His investigations of geology suggested that the Earth itself was subject to processes of dissolution that would eventually reduce all human achievement to dust. The man who had once believed that art could unlock the secrets of creation now found himself confronting the ultimate secret, that everything created was destined for destruction. His late drawings of deluges and catastrophes seemed to prophesy the end of the world he had spent his life trying to understand. The patronage that had once seemed to offer unlimited possibilities now felt like a series of constraints that prevented him from pursuing his deepest investigations. Wealthy merchants wanted portraits that would flatter their vanity, while political leaders sought works that would glorify their achievements. None seemed to understand that Leonardo's true ambition was not to create beautiful objects, but to penetrate the fundamental mysteries of existence itself. As the first decade of the 16th century drew to a close, Leonardo found himself increasingly isolated from the world of conventional artistic achievement. His reputation as a genius was matched only by his reputation as an unreliable eccentric who promised miracles but delivered fragments. The notebooks that contained his greatest discoveries remained largely incomprehensible to contemporaries, written in mirror script and organized according to principles that reflected the unique workings of his mind. The artist who had once been celebrated as the epitome of Renaissance achievement now seemed to embody its contradictions and limitations. He had pushed the boundaries of human knowledge further than any individual before him, yet he had also discovered that knowledge itself was a burden that grew heavier with each new understanding. In the candlelit chambers where Leonardo dissected cadavers and mapped the secret territories of the human form, he discovered that understanding the body's mysteries only deepened the enigma of the soul. The man who had sought to capture divine truth through the marriage of art and science was about to confront the ultimate question, whether human consciousness itself was capable of comprehending the cosmos it inhabited. In the clandestine chambers beneath Florence's medical institutions, where shadows danced with candlelight and the scent of preservation oils mingled with scholarly determination, Leonardo da Vinci embarked upon his most profound intellectual odyssey. The year was 5004, and the master had transcended mere artistic representation to become something far more revolutionary, a systematic anatomist whose scalpel would dissect not merely flesh, but the very mysteries of human existence. The ecclesiastical prohibitions against anatomical dissection had created a peculiar scholarly underground where Leonardo's insatiable curiosity found its most dangerous expression. Working in secrecy, often under cover of darkness, he approached each cadaver not as a macabre specimen, but as a manuscript written in flesh and bone, each organ a chapter in the grand narrative of human mechanics. His methodical approach demonstrated an intellectual rigor that transcended medieval superstition, establishing anatomical investigation as a legitimate scientific pursuit. Leonardo's revolutionary discoveries emerged from his unique synthesis of artistic observation and mechanical understanding. Where medieval physicians had relied upon classical texts and theoretical speculation, Leonardo employed direct empirical observation, creating anatomical drawings of unprecedented accuracy. His illustrations of the human heart revealed its 4 chambers with precision that would not be matched for centuries, while his studies of muscle structure demonstrated a comprehension of biomechanics that anticipated modern kinesiology. The philosophical implications of his anatomical work extended far beyond medical knowledge. Through systematic dissection, Leonardo developed a mechanistic understanding of human physiology that challenged prevailing theological interpretations of the body as a divine mystery. His notebooks reveal a mind grappling with the intersection of spiritual and material existence, seeking to understand how consciousness emerges from physical structure. This intellectual tension between scientific materialism and Renaissance humanism would define his later philosophical meditations. His discoveries in cardiovascular anatomy particularly exemplified his synthetic approach to knowledge. Leonardo's observations of blood flow anticipated Harvey's circulation theory by over a century, while his studies of heart valve function demonstrated an engineering perspective on biological systems. He understood the heart not merely as a metaphorical seat of emotion, but as a mechanical pump whose efficiency could be analyzed and understood through the same principles governing his hydraulic inventions. The intersection of art and science in Leonardo's anatomical work established new standards for scientific illustration. His drawings were not merely technical diagrams, but aesthetic achievements that communicated complex three-dimensional relationships through innovative graphic techniques. His cross-sectional views, exploded diagrams, and comparative studies created a visual language for scientific communication that influenced centuries of medical illustration. Leonardo's anatomical investigations also revealed his growing understanding of the interconnectedness of natural systems. His studies of human anatomy informed his observations of plant structure, while his hydraulic theories influenced his understanding of blood circulation. This systematic approach to knowledge, wherein insights from one domain illuminated understanding in another, represented a fundamental shift toward modern scientific methodology. The burden of his discoveries weighed heavily upon Leonardo's consciousness. His notebooks record increasing fascination with the mechanisms of aging, disease, and death, as if his deeper understanding of life's machinery only intensified his awareness of its ultimate fragility. The anatomist who had mapped the territories of the human form found himself confronting the philosophical implications of mortality with unprecedented clarity. His late anatomical drawings reveal an artist-scientist grappling with the cosmic implications of his discoveries. The same hand that had painted the Mona Lisa's enigmatic smile now traced the neural pathways that might generate such expressions, seeking to understand the mysterious relationship between mind and matter. In dissecting the physical basis of human experience, Leonardo had embarked upon a journey that would lead him to contemplate the very nature of consciousness itself. The accumulation of anatomical knowledge represented more than scientific achievement. It constituted a profound meditation on the human condition. Through his systematic exploration of the body's hidden architecture, Leonardo had discovered that understanding the mechanisms of life only deepened the mystery of existence itself, preparing him for the cosmic perspectives that would characterize his final years. Above the rolling hills of Tuscany, where thermal currents carried hawks in lazy spirals toward the heavens, Leonardo da Vinci lifted his eyes from anatomical dissections to contemplate humanity's most ancient aspiration, the conquest of the skies. His obsession with flight represented more than mechanical curiosity. It embodied the Renaissance ideal of human transcendence, the belief that intellect and ingenuity could overcome the fundamental limitations of earthly existence. Leonardo's systematic approach to flight began with meticulous observation of avian mechanics. His notebooks filled with detailed studies of wing structure, feather arrangement, and the subtle aerodynamics of soaring flight. Unlike medieval scholars who might have approached flight through theoretical speculation, Leonardo employed empirical methodology, understanding that successful artificial flight required comprehension of natural principles rather than mere mechanical imitation. His ornithopter designs demonstrated sophisticated understanding of wing mechanics that anticipated modern principles of aerodynamics. Leonardo recognized that successful flight required not merely flapping motion, but complex coordination of lift, thrust, and control surfaces. His designs incorporated innovative features such as adjustable wing angles and rudimentary control mechanisms that revealed deep comprehension of flight dynamics. The philosophical implications of Leonardo's flight studies extended far beyond technological achievement. In his notebooks, he contemplated flight as the ultimate expression of human potential, the physical manifestation of intellectual transcendence. His writings reveal a mind that understood artificial flight not merely as transportation, but as symbolic liberation from earthly constraints, the realization of humanity's divine aspirations through technological mastery. Leonardo's understanding of air resistance and atmospheric pressure demonstrated remarkable prescience regarding aerodynamic principles. His studies of flowing water informed his comprehension of air movement, while his observations of falling leaves revealed insights into the relationship between surface area and atmospheric resistance. This interdisciplinary approach to flight mechanics exemplified his synthetic methodology, wherein insights from diverse fields contributed to comprehensive understanding. The practical challenges of implementing his flight designs revealed the tragic gap between Renaissance vision and technological capability. Leonardo's materials, wood, fabric, and human muscle power, proved inadequate for sustained flight, while his understanding of power-to-weight ratios remained limited by contemporary engineering constraints. His failed experimental attempts reflected not intellectual inadequacy, but the fundamental mismatch between visionary conception and technological feasibility. His collaboration with assistants in constructing flight apparatus demonstrated Leonardo's willingness to risk reputation and safety in pursuit of transcendent achievement. Contemporary accounts describe elaborate preparations for flight experiments, with Leonardo's workshop transformed into an aeronautical laboratory where theoretical designs confronted practical limitations. These experimental failures, rather than discouraging innovation, seem to intensify his determination to solve the riddle of human flight. The military applications of Leonardo's flight research reveal the complex relationship between scientific innovation and practical necessity in Renaissance society. His designs for aerial reconnaissance platforms and flying siege engines demonstrated how visionary thinking could be harnessed for immediate tactical advantage, while his correspondence with patrons reveals the constant tension between pure research and utilitarian application. Leonardo's flight studies also reflected his growing awareness of humanity's relationship with natural forces. His observations of bird flight revealed not merely mechanical principles, but ecological relationships, as he understood that successful flight required harmony with atmospheric conditions rather than domination of natural forces. This ecological perspective would influence his later philosophical meditations on humanity's place within natural systems. The psychological dimensions of Leonardo's flight obsession reveal a mind grappling with fundamental questions of human limitation and transcendence. His notebooks suggest that flight represented not merely technological achievement, but spiritual liberation, the physical manifestation of intellectual freedom. In contemplating human flight, Leonardo was essentially exploring the boundaries of human possibility itself. His late flight studies demonstrate increasing sophistication in aerodynamic understanding, with designs that incorporated principles of stability, control, and efficient power transmission. His helicopter concept, though technologically premature, revealed remarkable intuition regarding vertical flight principles, while his parachute designs anticipated modern safety considerations with surprising accuracy. The ultimate tragedy of Leonardo's flight aspirations lay not in technical failure, but in temporal displacement. His visionary designs, dismissed as impossible fantasies by contemporary observers, would prove prophetic centuries later when technological capabilities finally matched his theoretical understanding. In reaching toward the skies, Leonardo had glimpsed humanity's aeronautical future while remaining tragically bound to the earth by the limitations of his historical moment. In the twilight chambers of his later years, where accumulated notebooks testified to a lifetime of relentless inquiry, Leonardo da Vinci confronted the most profound philosophical challenge of his existence, the recognition that time itself was the ultimate creative and destructive force, building civilizations and reducing them to dust with equal indifference. His late-period Deluge drawings represent not merely artistic expression, but apocalyptic meditation, the culmination of a mind that had penetrated too deeply into the mechanics of existence to maintain comfortable illusions about permanence. The philosophical weight of Leonardo's flood studies emerged from his comprehensive understanding of natural forces. His hydraulic investigations had revealed water's capacity for both creation and destruction, while his geological observations demonstrated the Earth's constant transformation through erosion and sedimentation. This accumulated knowledge coalesced into a cosmic perspective that viewed civilizational achievement as fundamentally transient, subject to natural forces that operated on timescales that dwarfed human ambition. Leonardo's apocalyptic visions reflected sophisticated understanding of environmental dynamics that anticipated modern ecological thinking. His Deluge drawings depicted not random catastrophe, but systematic destruction, with floodwaters following predictable patterns based on topographical analysis and hydraulic principles. This scientific approach to apocalyptic imagery distinguished his work from medieval representations of divine judgment, presenting instead a naturalistic vision of civilizational vulnerability. The technical sophistication of his flood drawings demonstrated artistic mastery, serving philosophical meditation. His spiraling waterforms, rendered with unprecedented dynamic energy, conveyed the mathematical precision underlying natural chaos. Each vortex and turbulent flow represented hours of careful observation translated into visual metaphor, creating images that were simultaneously scientifically accurate and emotionally overwhelming. His late self-portraits during this period reveal the psychological impact of confronting temporal destruction. The aged face that stared back from his drawings reflected not merely physical aging, but spiritual transformation, the countenance of a mind that had gazed too long into the abyss of cosmic indifference. These self-examinations demonstrated remarkable psychological honesty, presenting genius not as triumphant achievement, but as burden-bearing wisdom. The synthesis of Leonardo's lifetime knowledge into cosmic perspective represented his most mature philosophical achievement. His understanding of human anatomy, geological processes, hydraulic dynamics, and atmospheric phenomena coalesced into a unified vision of natural law that transcended individual disciplines. This synthetic approach to knowledge, characteristic of his entire career, reached its culmination in his ability to perceive universal patterns underlying apparently diverse phenomena. Leonardo's contemplation of time's destructive power paradoxically intensified his appreciation for beauty's ephemeral nature. His late paintings, particularly his treatment of landscape backgrounds, revealed an artist acutely aware of transience who responded by creating works of unprecedented subtlety and emotional depth. The knowledge that all beauty must ultimately succumb to time's passage seemed to inspire rather than paralyze his creative efforts. The philosophical implications of his Deluge studies extended beyond environmental catastrophe to encompass civilizational critique. Leonardo's apocalyptic visions can be interpreted as commentary on human hubris, the recognition that technological achievement and cultural sophistication provided no ultimate protection against natural forces. This perspective anticipated modern environmental concerns while maintaining Renaissance confidence in human intellectual capacity. His correspondence during this period reveals increasing preoccupation with legacy and the preservation of knowledge. Understanding that his own mortality was approaching, Leonardo struggled with the question of how accumulated wisdom might survive individual death. His attempts to organize his notebooks and codify his discoveries reflected desperate urgency to transmit insights that might otherwise perish with their creator. The religious dimensions of Leonardo's Deluge imagery require careful interpretation within the context of Renaissance theology. While his flood drawings might superficially resemble biblical narratives, their scientific foundation suggests a more complex theological position. Leonardo seemed to envision divine action working through natural law rather than supernatural intervention, presenting a vision of cosmic justice that operated through environmental rather than miraculous means. His late masterpieces, created during this period of apocalyptic meditation, reflect an artist working under the shadow of ultimate questions. The mysterious landscapes that background his final paintings suggest worlds on the verge of transformation, while his treatment of human figures demonstrates acute awareness of mortality's proximity. These works represent artistic achievement informed by philosophical maturity, beauty created in full recognition of its own transience. The accumulated weight of Leonardo's cosmic perspective created increasing isolation from contemporary society. His ability to perceive long-term patterns and ultimate destinations set him apart from those preoccupied with immediate concerns, creating a psychological distance that would characterize his final years. In glimpsing eternity, Leonardo had paradoxically become more aware of his own temporal limitations. Leonardo's Deluge studies ultimately represented preparation for his own dissolution, the intellectual and emotional work necessary to approach death with philosophical equanimity. By confronting the ultimate destructive force, time itself, he was preparing himself for the final surrender that awaited every creative spirit, regardless of genius or achievement. The autumn of 1560 witnessed a pilgrimage of profound symbolic significance as Leonardo da Vinci, his worldly possessions reduced to precious notebooks and unfinished paintings, crossed the Alps toward the French court of Francis I. This final journey represented not mere geographical relocation, but spiritual exile, the inevitable fate of a mind that had transcended the intellectual boundaries of its native culture and could find recognition only in foreign patronage. Francis I's invitation reflected the young monarch's sophisticated understanding of Renaissance cultural prestige. The French king, barely 22 years old, possessed sufficient intellectual maturity to recognize that hosting Leonardo would enhance his court's reputation throughout Europe. This royal patronage represented more than artistic collecting. It constituted a strategic investment in cultural capital that would elevate French civilization to unprecedented heights. The Chateau of Clou, Leonardo's final residence, provided an environment perfectly suited to his contemplative needs. The medieval structure, with its intimate chambers and garden prospects, offered refuge from the political complexities that had plagued his Italian career. Here, removed from the immediate pressures of commission deadlines and patron demands, Leonardo could pursue his investigations with the freedom that had always eluded him in the competitive Italian art world. His relationship with Francis I revealed the complex dynamics between genius and power in Renaissance society. The young king's genuine intellectual curiosity created an atmosphere of mutual respect, with Leonardo serving not merely as court artist, but as philosophical advisor and scientific consultant. Their conversations, recorded in contemporary accounts, demonstrate the rare circumstance of political authority submitting to intellectual superiority. The paralysis of Leonardo's right hand during this period created poignant symbolism regarding the relationship between physical limitation and creative expression. While his dominant hand could no longer execute the precise drawings that had defined his career, his left hand adapted to continue writing, suggesting that intellectual capacity transcended physical constraint. This adaptation demonstrated the resilience of creative genius when confronted with mortality's approach. Leonardo's role as living legend at the French court represented both privilege and burden. Courtiers and visitors sought audience with the renowned master, treating him as a repository of Renaissance wisdom rather than a working artist. This transformation from active creator to cultural monument reflected the inevitable fate of genius that outlives its productive capacity while maintaining its symbolic importance. His final engineering projects in France demonstrated continuing intellectual vitality despite advancing age. Leonardo's designs for court entertainments, hydraulic systems, and architectural modifications revealed a mind still capable of innovative thinking. However, these projects possessed a different character from his earlier work, emphasizing refinement and elegance rather than revolutionary innovation. The accumulation of unfinished works during this period created a unique artistic legacy. Leonardo's inability to complete major projects, a lifelong characteristic, assumed new meaning in the context of approaching mortality. His unfinished paintings and incomplete manuscripts represented not failure, but a different kind of achievement, the demonstration that certain forms of perfection exist only in perpetual becoming rather than final completion. His preparation for death during this period reflected the philosophical equanimity he had developed through decades of contemplating natural cycles. Leonardo's correspondence reveals a mind at peace with mortality, understanding death not as defeat, but as natural completion. His arrangements for the distribution of his possessions demonstrated practical wisdom combined with spiritual acceptance. The legend of Leonardo dying in Francis I's arms, though historically uncertain, possesses profound symbolic significance. Whether factually accurate or not, this narrative represents the ideal relationship between genius and power, with political authority recognizing its obligation to honor intellectual achievement. The image of the young king supporting the aged master's final moments embodies Renaissance ideals of cultural reverence. Leonardo's final attempts to organize his notebooks revealed desperate urgency to preserve accumulated knowledge for future generations. Understanding that his death would terminate decades of investigation, he struggled to codify discoveries that might otherwise perish with their creator. This archival effort represented his final creative act, the transformation of personal insight into cultural inheritance. The immediate recognition of what the world would lose with Leonardo's death demonstrated contemporary awareness of his unique significance. Court observers understood that they were witnessing not merely the end of an artistic career, but the conclusion of a particular type of Renaissance genius that might never recur. This recognition elevated Leonardo's final days from personal tragedy to cultural mourning. His spiritual preparation for death reflected the synthesis of scientific understanding and philosophical acceptance that had characterized his mature thinking. Leonardo approached mortality not with fear but with curiosity, understanding death as the final mystery to be experienced rather than solved. This intellectual courage in confronting the ultimate unknown represented the culmination of a lifetime spent pursuing knowledge regardless of personal cost. The spring setting of Leonardo's death provided poetic symmetry to a life that had begun amid the flowering hills of Tuscany. The renewal of natural cycles offered comfort to a mind that had spent decades studying the patterns of growth, decay, and regeneration. In dying during spring's return, Leonardo achieved harmony with the natural rhythms he had observed throughout his scientific career. The final weeks of Leonardo da Vinci's earthly existence unfolded with the careful deliberation of a masterpiece approaching completion, each day adding subtle refinements to a life that had already achieved mythic proportions. In the quiet chambers of Clou, where morning light filtered through leaded windows to illuminate scattered drawings and half-finished mechanical devices, the master prepared for his ultimate performance, the graceful orchestration of his own departure from the world he had spent a lifetime trying to understand. Contemporary accounts describe Leonardo's final conversations with Francis I as exchanges between intellectual equals, with the young monarch seeking guidance on questions that transcended mere artistic technique. These dialogues revealed the unique relationship that had developed between genius and power, with political authority recognizing its obligation to honor intellectual achievement. Francis I's frequent visits to the chateau demonstrated genuine affection combined with cultural reverence, creating an atmosphere of dignified preparation for the inevitable conclusion. The legend of Leonardo dying in the king's arms, while historically uncertain, possesses profound symbolic resonance that illuminates the Renaissance ideal of cultural patronage. Whether factually accurate or not, this narrative represents the perfect synthesis of political power and intellectual achievement, with temporal authority providing support for transcendent genius in its final moments. The image embodies the era's highest aspirations regarding the relationship between rulers and the cultural figures who elevated their courts above mere political administration. Leonardo's final attempts to organize his notebooks revealed desperate urgency to preserve accumulated knowledge for future generations. Understanding that his death would terminate decades of investigation, he struggled to codify discoveries that might otherwise perish with their creator. His assistants reported finding him surrounded by scattered papers, attempting to impose order on a lifetime's worth of observations, inventions, and philosophical meditations that had never been systematically compiled. The distribution of his possessions reflected careful consideration of each item's significance and appropriate recipient. His paintings, few in number but revolutionary in conception, were allocated to individuals capable of preserving and appreciating their artistic achievement. His scientific instruments and mechanical devices were distributed among assistants who might continue his investigative work, while his most precious notebooks were entrusted to disciples who understood their intellectual importance. Leonardo's spiritual preparation for death demonstrated the philosophical equanimity he had developed through decades of contemplating natural cycles. His correspondence reveals a mind at peace with mortality, understanding death not as defeat but as natural completion of life's arc. This acceptance reflected not resignation, but intellectual courage, the willingness to embrace the ultimate mystery with the same curiosity that had driven his scientific investigations. The physical circumstances of his decline provided poignant symbolism regarding the relationship between creative genius and mortal limitation. The hand that had painted the Mona Lisa's enigmatic smile and drawn revolutionary anatomical diagrams now trembled with advancing paralysis, yet Leonardo's intellectual capacity remained undiminished. His final drawings, executed with his left hand, demonstrated that creative spirit transcended physical constraint even as the body approached dissolution. His last conversations with students and assistants revealed a mind still engaged with the fundamental questions that had driven his career. Rather than dwelling on past achievements, Leonardo continued to speculate about unsolved problems, sharing insights that might guide future investigations. This intellectual generosity, characteristic of his entire career, continued unabated even as mortality approached. The timing of Leonardo's death during the spring of 1519 provided natural symbolism that contemporary observers found deeply meaningful. The renewal of natural cycles offered comfort to those mourning the loss of exceptional genius, suggesting that death represented not termination, but transformation. The master who had spent decades studying the patterns of growth, decay, and regeneration achieved final harmony with the natural rhythms he had observed throughout his scientific career. The immediate aftermath of Leonardo's death revealed the extent to which his reputation had transcended artistic achievement to become cultural legend. Court observers understood that they had witnessed not merely the end of an individual career, but the conclusion of a particular type of Renaissance genius that might never recur. This recognition elevated Leonardo's passing from personal tragedy to civilizational mourning, with contemporary accounts emphasizing the magnitude of what had been lost. The peaceful nature of his final moments, as recorded by those present, reflected the philosophical preparation that had characterized his approach to mortality. Leonardo's death demonstrated that intellectual courage, cultivated through a lifetime of pursuing knowledge regardless of personal cost, could provide equanimity even in the face of ultimate dissolution. His final breath represented not defeat, but completion, the natural conclusion of a life lived in service to understanding. The preservation of his final words and gestures by contemporary witnesses reflected immediate recognition of their historical significance. These accounts, whether entirely accurate or embellished by legend, testified to the profound impact of Leonardo's presence on those who knew him. His death marked not simply the end of a remarkable individual, but the conclusion of an era in which single minds could encompass the full range of human knowledge and achievement. The symbolic resonance of Leonardo's death extended beyond personal loss to encompass broader questions about the relationship between genius and mortality. His passing forced contemporary observers to confront the tragic reality that exceptional achievement provided no protection against time's ultimate authority. Yet, in demonstrating how intellectual greatness could approach death with dignity and grace, Leonardo's final performance offered comfort to those who would continue the work of understanding and creating in his absence. The transformation of Leonardo from living person to eternal symbol began immediately following his death, as accounts of his final days assumed legendary proportions. The man who had spent his life seeking to understand the mysteries of existence had become mystery himself, his death serving as the foundation for myths that would inspire future generations to pursue their own impossible dreams. The immediate aftermath of Leonardo da Vinci's death in the spring of 1519 initiated a complex process of cultural transformation that would ultimately transcend the loss of individual genius to establish enduring patterns of intellectual aspiration. Within hours of his final breath, the man who had embodied Renaissance ideals of comprehensive knowledge began his metamorphosis from historical figure to eternal symbol, his death marking not conclusion but commencement of a different kind of cultural life. The dispersal of Leonardo's notebooks following his death created an intellectual diaspora that would influence European thought for centuries. His manuscripts, scattered among various inheritors and collectors, carried revolutionary insights into diverse fields of human knowledge. Each notebook that found its way to a different library or private collection became a seed of innovation, introducing concepts that would not be fully understood or appreciated until technological development caught up with Leonardo's prescient vision. Francesco Melzi, Leonardo's most devoted pupil and primary inheritor, assumed the crucial role of preserving and organizing the master's intellectual legacy. His careful cataloguing of drawings, scientific observations, and philosophical meditations ensured that Leonardo's contributions to human knowledge would survive the immediate chaos following his death. Melzi's editorial work represented the first systematic attempt to comprehend the full scope of Leonardo's achievement, establishing foundations for future scholarship. The gradual recognition of Leonardo's scientific contributions required centuries of intellectual development before contemporary minds could fully appreciate his insights. His anatomical discoveries, centuries ahead of medical understanding, awaited rediscovery by later investigators who would marvel at their accuracy. His engineering concepts, dismissed as impossible fantasies by Renaissance observers, proved prophetic when technological capability finally matched his theoretical understanding. The creation of the Renaissance man ideal drew heavily upon Leonardo's example, transforming his unique combination of artistic and scientific achievement into a cultural archetype. This idealization, while honoring his memory, also simplified the complex reality of his intellectual development. The historical Leonardo, with his struggles, failures, and human limitations, became secondary to the mythic figure who represented unlimited human potential. His influence on subsequent generations of artists extended far beyond technical instruction to encompass philosophical approach to creative work. The Leonardo tradition emphasized direct observation, experimental methodology, and synthesis of diverse knowledge domains. Artists who studied his notebooks learned not merely techniques, but intellectual attitudes that would transform their approach to creative problem-solving. The paradoxical nature of Leonardo's legacy, wherein his failures proved as instructive as his successes, established new understanding of intellectual achievement. His unfinished paintings demonstrated that certain forms of perfection exist only in perpetual becoming rather than final completion. This insight influenced artistic theory and practice, suggesting that the creative process itself might be more significant than finished products. The gradual publication of Leonardo's writings during the centuries following his death revealed the true scope of his intellectual ambitions. Each newly discovered manuscript expanded understanding of his contributions, demonstrating that his reputation as primarily an artist had obscured equally significant achievements in science, engineering, and philosophy. This ongoing process of discovery maintained Leonardo's relevance across changing intellectual paradigms. His transformation from person to symbol occurred through the complex interaction of historical fact and cultural need. Successive generations projected their own aspirations onto Leonardo's example, finding in his life story confirmation of their beliefs about human potential. This process of mythologization, while potentially distorting historical accuracy, served essential cultural functions by maintaining ideals of intellectual courage and creative ambition. The enduring mystery surrounding Leonardo's unfinished works contributed significantly to his legendary status. The incomplete nature of many projects invited speculation about what might have been achieved, creating a sense of infinite possibility that complete works could never provide. This incompleteness, rather than diminishing his reputation, enhanced it by suggesting that genius operates on scales too vast for complete realization within individual lifetimes. The international character of Leonardo's influence reflected the universal appeal of his intellectual approach. His combination of artistic sensitivity with scientific rigor transcended national boundaries, inspiring innovators across diverse cultural contexts. This cosmopolitan legacy established Leonardo as a figure belonging not to Italian Renaissance history alone, but to human civilization generally. The philosophical implications of Leonardo's example extended beyond specific achievements to encompass fundamental questions about the nature of genius itself. His life story provided evidence that exceptional minds could transcend the limitations of their historical circumstances, achieving insights that remained relevant across centuries. This demonstration of intellectual transcendence offered hope that human consciousness possessed capacities for understanding that exceeded immediate practical requirements. The continuing relevance of Leonardo's approach to knowledge in contemporary scientific and artistic contexts demonstrated the enduring value of his synthetic methodology. His refusal to accept disciplinary boundaries, his emphasis on direct observation, and his integration of theoretical understanding with practical application established patterns that remain influential in modern research and creative work. The educational implications of Leonardo's legacy influenced pedagogical theory and practice for centuries following his death. His example suggested that true learning required not mere accumulation of information, but development of observational skills, analytical thinking, and creative synthesis. This educational philosophy challenged traditional approaches that emphasized memorization and repetition rather than original investigation. The technological prophecies contained in Leonardo's notebooks provided recurring validation of his visionary capabilities as later inventors independently developed similar devices. Each confirmation of his insights reinforced his reputation as a mind capable of perceiving future possibilities, maintaining his relevance even as specific technologies evolved beyond his original conceptions. The beautiful incompleteness of Leonardo's achievement ultimately became his greatest completion, demonstrating that certain forms of perfection exist only in perpetual striving rather than final attainment. His life story provided comfort to those who recognized their own limitations while maintaining ambitions that exceeded their capabilities, suggesting that the nobility of human aspiration transcended the inevitability of partial failure. In the gentle territory between consciousness and sleep, where the boundaries of time dissolve and the impossible becomes naturally accessible, Leonardo da Vinci's spirit finds its most appropriate dwelling. Here, in the realm of dreams and imagination, the restless genius who spent his earthly life attempting to bridge the gap between vision and reality achieves final synthesis, his influence flowing like water through the channels of human consciousness, nourishing creativity across the centuries. The universal themes that emerge from Leonardo's life story, curiosity, creativity, and the poignant confrontation with mortality, speak to fundamental aspects of human experience that transcend historical circumstance. His example demonstrates that the most profound satisfaction comes not from completing ambitious projects, but from pursuing them with wholehearted dedication, finding meaning in the process of investigation rather than solely in final results. Leonardo's embodiment of the human desire to transcend limitations provides enduring inspiration for those who recognize their own constraints while maintaining aspirations that exceed their capabilities. His life story suggests that the nobility of human ambition lies not in achieving impossible goals, but in maintaining the courage to pursue them despite inevitable obstacles. This philosophical perspective offers comfort to all who struggle with the gap between vision and accomplishment. The beautiful tragedy of incomplete perfection that characterized Leonardo's career illuminates essential truths about creative work generally. His unfinished paintings and unrealized inventions demonstrate that certain forms of excellence exist only in perpetual becoming, suggesting that the creative process itself might be more significant than finished products. This insight transforms apparent failure into a different kind of achievement, one measured by depth of engagement rather than completion of tasks. His notebooks, scattered across libraries and private collections throughout the world, continue to function as maps to undiscovered countries of the mind. Each page reveals not merely historical information, but continuing invitation to pursue knowledge with the same passionate intensity that drove their creator. These manuscripts serve as permanent reminders that human consciousness possesses capacities for understanding that exceed immediate practical requirements. The continuing mystery of genius itself finds its most compelling embodiment in Leonardo's example. His life story provides evidence that exceptional minds can transcend the limitations of their historical circumstances, achieving insights that remain relevant across centuries. Yet this demonstration of intellectual transcendence only deepens questions about the nature of creative capacity and the conditions that allow it to flourish. The comfort of knowing that such minds exist provides psychological sustenance for those who might otherwise despair of human potential. Leonardo's example suggests that consciousness itself possesses undeveloped capacities for understanding and creating that await cultivation. His life story offers hope that the human spirit contains resources for transcending immediate limitations while maintaining engagement with practical reality. The invitation to embrace our own curiosity that emerges from contemplating Leonardo's example constitutes perhaps his most valuable legacy. His life demonstrates that the questions we ask might be more significant than the answers we obtain, that the process of investigation itself transforms consciousness in ways that transcend specific discoveries. This philosophical perspective encourages intellectual courage while maintaining humility about the ultimate limits of human understanding. The democratic nature of curiosity ensures that Leonardo's example remains accessible to all who choose to cultivate observational skills and analytical thinking. His genius lay not in supernatural endowment, but in the systematic application of natural human capacities that remain available to anyone willing to develop them. This accessibility transforms his example from intimidating display of exceptional ability into encouraging demonstration of human potential. The synthesis of artistic and scientific approaches that characterize Leonardo's method provides continuing guidance for those seeking to integrate diverse forms of knowledge. His refusal to accept disciplinary boundaries suggests that the most profound insights emerge from combining different perspectives rather than pursuing isolated specializations. This integrative approach remains relevant in contemporary contexts, where complex problems require interdisciplinary solutions. The environmental consciousness that emerged from Leonardo's systematic study of natural systems anticipates contemporary concerns about humanity's relationship with natural processes. His understanding of interconnectedness and his recognition of natural cycles provide philosophical foundation for ecological thinking that remains urgently relevant. His example suggests that careful observation of natural patterns can inform human decision-making in ways that promote long-term sustainability. The spiritual dimensions of Leonardo's pursuit of knowledge demonstrate that scientific investigation need not diminish appreciation for mystery and beauty. His life story suggests that deeper understanding of natural processes can intensify rather than reduce wonder at the complexity and elegance of existence. This integration of knowledge and reverence provides model for maintaining both intellectual rigor and spiritual openness. The timeless quality of Leonardo's appeal reflects his embodiment of permanent human aspirations that transcend specific historical circumstances. His desire to understand, to create, and to transcend limitations speaks to fundamental aspects of consciousness that remain constant across cultural and temporal boundaries. This universality ensures that his example will continue to inspire future generations, regardless of technological or social changes. The peaceful resolution that emerges from contemplating Leonardo's complete life story provides comfort for those struggling with their own limitations and mortality. His example demonstrates that intellectual courage, cultivated through dedicated pursuit of understanding, can provide equanimity even when facing ultimate questions. This demonstration of dignified engagement with existence offers hope that human consciousness possesses resources for finding meaning despite inevitable constraints. In the quiet chambers of sleep, where the logical boundaries of waking consciousness dissolve into fluid possibilities, we carry with us the gentle presence of Leonardo da Vinci's spirit. His example reminds us that the greatest works of art are not necessarily painted on canvas or carved from stone, but lived in the endless curiosity of the human heart, expressed through the patient dedication to understanding that transforms ordinary existence into extraordinary achievement. The undying dream that Leonardo represents, the vision of human consciousness fully engaged with the mystery and beauty of existence, continues to call to those who recognize their own capacity for wonder. His life story suggests that this engagement with mystery constitutes not merely intellectual pursuit, but spiritual practice, a way of honoring the gift of consciousness through dedicated attention to the world's infinite complexity and beauty. And so, in the gentle territory between sleeping and waking, Leonardo's influence flows onward, carrying with it the promise that human curiosity, patiently cultivated and courageously expressed, can transcend the boundaries of individual mortality to become part of the eternal conversation between consciousness and creation that defines the most profound dimensions of human experience.